Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Complete Creative, the podcast that helps you build and sustain a better creative business. And today on the show, we have Sean Maclaughlan. Sean is a writer and creator, and specifically the writer of a book called Writing Secrets of the World's Most Prolific Authors. And this interview actually came from him emailing me through my website. A lot of people email me show ideas, and usually I say no. But I know Sean from our Facebook group, and the idea just really resonated with me because I try to write really fast and put out really great books on top of it. And I really loved his idea of coming on and talking about what he learned from studying the world's most prolific authors. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you do, did you know that I have a free course about 4 hours long about how to write a great novel fast? And you can take it absolutely free at thecompletecreative.com/novel. All right, that being said, let's get on with the show. Take it away, Sean. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
Well, at the moment, I'm passionate about writing in general, of course, but also a couple of specific series that I'm doing. I go to North Africa a lot. I'm based here in Madrid, and I spend a lot of time in both Morocco and Egypt. I have two different series there. One called The Masked Man of Cairo, which is sort of a pulpy mystery set in 1919. People have said it was a mix of Agatha Christie and Indiana Jones, which I love that review. And another is the Interzone Mysteries, set in Morocco, specifically in Tangier during the international zone period in the 50s, when Tangier was a sin capital of the Mediterranean. It was run by a dozen different countries and not really run by anybody. It was this sort of mix of different authorities, and nobody actually was asserting any law. And so it was the Wild West of North Africa. So that's a great place to put a hard-boiled detective. So both of those are fun, but I'm also really into working on upping my word count right now. As we all know, it's we're going through a global catastrophe, and here in Madrid, I'm at one of the epicenters. So we've been locked down for 2 weeks now, and I've been doing a lot of writing. I've been working specifically to up my word count, working at times I didn't usually work, working more because I have to get something positive out of this experience.
What are you at now, and what are you trying to get to as far as word count goes?
Well, I before this all hit, I strove for 20,000 words a week, and I usually got that. I've hit a million words a year a couple of times, and I've gotten into past 900,000 words a year several times. Now, to break that down, a million words a year is 20,000 words a week for 50 weeks. That gives you 2 weeks off, or 2 weeks to make up for bad weeks. Of course, life gets in the way sometimes. And so I don't always make that goal. Now, the last couple of weeks, it's been 22,000 words a week. And what that comes out to is 3,000 words a day, plus another 1,000 thrown in somewhere. I'm going to keep pushing it every week. I'm going to do a little more, and I'm going to see where that goes. I also do that with my physical workout as much as I can, stuck in a apartment in Madrid. I've been doing 100 push-ups a day. I'm going to try to keep that going up. I have various other exercises I'm doing, but it's rather limiting here. I miss my gym.
Yeah, I get that. Over in LA, we can still at least go for walks around the neighborhood, even though most of the other stuff is shut down. So,
Mm.
I do have a question for you about word count, because I'm always interested in people that say they're doing 20,000 words a week, or more than that. Which is, what do you do for editing? Like, how are you putting editing into this, like, 20,000 words? Is it morning for writing and afternoon for editing, or how do you think about that?
It's it depends on the week. A lot of it has to do with the timing of certain projects. I always work on more than one project at a time. I find that that really works well for me. for example, right this week, I've been working on the fourth in the Masked Man of Cairo series, The Case of the Karnak Killer. And I've been working on an article for a radio magazine I contribute to regularly. I also have been working on a booklet on for a client, an Upwork client, on Roman magic and superstition. So I've been rotating between those three things. Oh, and I just finished an article about the pyramids at Dashur, which recently reopened, and I got to visit them back in January. So that was a fun article to write. But so I have all these different projects juggling. So I finished the Dashur article on Monday, and I edited it. I left it for a day, and I did some edits on it on Wednesday. In the meantime, I was doing a lot of the Roman book and the radio article and my novel. Just this morning, I finished and went back and edited the radio article. It's short and it's fairly easy. It's not going to take huge amounts of edits. I just had to fact check everything. So it was really just when it comes, and I found that it's best for me to time my peak creative period only for writing. I find that the first 4 hours of the day, after I've had my coffee and become human again, that's when I should write, and everything else can wait until the afternoon and evening. Email waits until the afternoon and evening. Editing waits the afternoon and evening. Research, as much as possible, waits to the afternoon and the evening. And I just spend the first 4 hours of my workday creating. And everybody else has different timing. Some people are night writers, some people are midday writers. For me, it's the morning.
And so when you say you're doing 20,000 words, so you're doing basically 20,000 words plus editing of all of the other
Yes.
projects that you're doing.
Yes.
All right. That's
Yeah, it's essential. New words are the most essential thing in this business. You need to have forward momentum. It's rare that I take a week off. If I get my 20,000 words early, I reward myself by having a day off because I like to go hiking. Unfortunately, not something I can do at the moment, but there are days that I take off, and I try to up my word count before going on a trip because my word count generally goes down when I'm on these writing research trips. When I'm in Egypt for the first few days, I'm seeing my friends in Cairo and I'm going and exploring, seeing all the new exhibitions, and so my writing goes down, and then it starts going up. Uh, the Middle East is not known for its nightlife, so I tend to become an evening writer when I'm in Morocco or Egypt.
well, uh I want to have the most time to talk about the main topic that we have today, which is you sent me an email, and I don't usually respond to many emails for being a guest, but I couldn't help but say yes to you because I know we've interacted in our Facebook group, and you were very complimentary to this show, and you happen to have a book on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is writing secrets of the world's most prolific authors, which I thought was a fascinating concept. And I read the book this morning in preparation for this, and I really resonated with it as a person who writes my own 20 to 25,000 words a week on when I'm in production on a book. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the overarchingness of the book and what it's about, although I think the title says a lot about what it's about. And then I have, just about 1,000 questions about this book.
Okay, great. Well, it's pretty much what it says on the tin there, Russell. I looked at the writing habits of about a dozen different authors, and I had certain criteria that I was looking for. I wanted each author to have to have published at least 300 titles. What was surprising about that was that I ended up with a lot more authors than I thought I was going to get, and I actually had to leave some out. Because the other criteria I had was that they had to have done the bulk of their work in the 20th century so that they were in a writing environment similar to ours. I could have gone back to the 19th century and got more, but I decided not to do that. And except for Renoke Inoue, I wanted, who we'll get to later, all of these writers have passed on because I wanted to look at their careers as a whole. So that narrowed it down a little bit, but I still ended up having to leave out a remarkable number of authors who had more than 300 plus titles on their bibliographies. It's incredible just how many writers have done that. And a lot of them have written about their techniques and how they've gone about it, and several of them have been the subjects of biographies or autobiographies. So culling through the Bodleian Library in Oxford, where I am twice a year, I was able to find a lot of information on these people, and hunting down their books in used bookstores and on eBay, and had some great reading. What's really nice to know about these prolific authors, whether they've written 300 novels or 500 novels or 800 fiction and nonfiction titles or even 1,000 westerns, is that for the most part they were really good writers. These are good books.
Yeah, so that brings me to the number one question that we need to clear up because the overarching chatter from authors when they talk about writing fast and putting out a lot of material is like, well, you can do that, but like, I want to make good books. So, uh, my first question is it possible to be prolific and good?
Well, the easy answer to that is yes. Now, let's look at some of the authors that are in this book. I'll just fire off a few right off the top. Isaac Asimov, 300 plus titles. He's actually the least prolific author in this book. I think most people would agree that he's got quality science fiction. Not everyone, it's not to everyone's taste, his science fiction, but he certainly left his mark on the genre, and he certainly was successful. Then you have people like Enid Mary Blyton, the children's author, Famous Five, Secret Seven, Naughty, also hundreds of nonfiction books. She was hugely popular in her time, and the Famous Five and Secret Seven are still published in the UK, and they're published in Spanish here in Spain. I don't know about the United States. We have authors like Max Brand. His real name was Frederick Faust, who is one of the pioneers of the Western genre. We have Walter Brown Gibson, who did the famous character The Shadow. Georges Simenon, who did Jules Marguerite, the famous Parisian detective, and the list goes on. So I think these people's books speak for themselves. They they are not high literature, but I would argue that high literature is not what most people are looking for, and it's certainly not the most remunerative sort of genre that you can do. One thing that I learned early on, and this was confirmed when I started looking at these amazing authors, is that a book doesn't take a certain amount of time. It takes a certain amount of effort. And if you can put that effort into a shorter time frame, you can get out more books. And that all comes down to self-discipline.
I love that you said that because it's true. You could write 1,000 words over 40 days, or you can write for 40,000 words over 8 days or over 5 days. And as long as you've trained yourself to do it well, you can pump out a book in considerably less time than somebody else can.
And that's a key phrase that you just said there, Russell, is train yourself. I've done a few different tricks, and there's a few different tricks in the book here as well. For example, Walter Brown Gibson, who did The Shadow, he did 300 books just for The Shadow, and he did a lot of writing for newspapers and magazines as well, and nonfiction books. Even his fan base, there's nobody who actually knows how many books he's written. He wrote so many, and he wrote under all sorts of different pen names. But one of the things that he always did was he had a typewriter. This is back in the days of manual typewriters. He had a typewriter in every room of his house with a different project on it. Nowadays, it's a lot easier with a laptop. And whenever he had spare moment, he'd go and start banging away on one of those typewriters. He would he was also a stage magician, so sometimes he'd go off, he'd write all day, go off and do a stage show, come back kind of tired, but oh, I can get another page out. Boom, 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 get it done, go to sleep. There are also writers who were very strict with their time and set out certain blocks of time. Enid Mary Blyton did that. The famous romance writer Barbara Cartland did that as well. Ursula Bloom, who was a very prolific British writer, did that as well. What's interesting is that it was the female writers who tended to set out a block of time, whereas the male writers tended to try to fill every spare moment of the day. Um, I find I do that the latter myself. For example, to give you an example of my day, I mentioned that my creative period's the morning. I get up in the morning. I'm doing a good imitation of a zombie. So I sit and I have a coffee and I listen on my shortwave radio to my favorite station out of Marrakesh. So I get some nice Arabic music in the background while I'm getting back to Homo sapiens. And then I go to my laptop before I have breakfast. And there's a reason I do that is because I have a slightly acidic stomach. And after having coffee on an empty stomach, within half an hour, I begin to get heartburn. So what I tell myself is, you can't have breakfast until you've written a page. So it actually becomes a physical demand to write the first page of the day. I do that, then I go have breakfast, and then I get back and I work for a good solid 4 hours. Then I go to the gym, and then I have lunch. I usually take a nap. I love the Spanish tradition of the siesta. I wake up refreshed again. It's like a second morning for me, and I work more. So it's just whenever you can find the time. And this is what I've been telling a lot of people in my writers group here in Madrid, which is now meeting on Zoom instead of in real life, is that you have all of this time now. You're not commuting to work. You're not commuting to the writers group. For most of them, we had to travel half an hour on the metro to get to the writers group. There and back, that's an extra hour to write. So take that time and really use it.
So interesting because I actually do the time block. I do 9 to 2. 9 to 2 is my writing time, and then other times are not my writing time. So I get, but I do sit down and I say I have to get 5,000 words or 10,000 edited words in this time block, or I can't get up. And if I finish it early, then I allow myself to like get up. But I I learned a long time ago that I can't do more than 5,000 words a day. They're not good. And I don't feel good after doing like 6,000 or 8,000 words a day, even if I'm doing it on
Hmm.
multiple projects. Sometimes I can do 5,000 words and then nonfiction stuff because nonfiction is like a different part of your brain. Yeah, for me, it was really important that like if it's fiction, I can do 5,000 words and like I can't. I've tried to push myself to do more, and every time I push myself to do more, even if I train myself to do more than that, like it ends up either being garbledygook or I feel terrible the next day.
Yeah, you have to know when you're done. I find that I have a bit of a barrier of 4,000 words a day, and I'm trying to push by that, but we'll see how that goes. But because I'd really like to get up to 30,000 words a week, we'll see if that happens. But you have to know when you're done, but you have to be honest with yourself too, because writers are excellent at making excuses for themselves. And
Yeah.
you have to take care of yourself, you have to exercise, you have to do all of that. And when you're getting to that point of being done, maybe do a few push-ups, maybe take a walk, and then try again and see how it goes. But and none of these writers, of course, started out writing 2 novels a month. They all had to work their way up to it.
Right. Well, one thing that you talk about in the book is that most of these writers were writing in the pulp tradition. And I do
Yes.
think that that is instructive to the kinds of books that you should that like people are writing when they're writing quickly. I'd love you to talk about that because I have my own experience in this in writing fast books in pulpy style and in non-pulpy style.
Well, certainly with the pulp style, one of the key elements is to have forward momentum in the story. And I find that comes easier if I'm working hard at it and oh, okay, I'm gonna do 3,000 words of this novel before I do any editing on anything else or work on that nonfiction project that I have. And like you, I switch between nonfiction and fiction because those are different parts of the brain. So I if I am tired with fiction, I can go into nonfiction and feel refreshed, and then work back to fiction. So you just you have to work at it and keep building it up. And with the with the pulp style, you have to start quick. Uh, there's one of the Bolsi Libro authors, one of the Spanish Western writers, Estefania, Marcial Estefania. He would always start with action. One of the westerns I read from him recently, literally the first sentence of the book is a guy jumping off the roof of a hotel and landing on another cowboy. So it's like that's how you start a pulp book, and then he doesn't let up from there. So yes, it is easier to write that sort of pulp style. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have exposition or thick description. For example, with my North African books, and to a certain extent with my World War One series, Trench Raiders, the readers want description. They want to be going through that market in Cairo. They want to see the ancient temple. They want to see the sleazy bars in the international zone in Tangier in the 50s, where everything goes. They want that. They want the gritty trench experience. So it's okay to slow down and give your reader a nice, healthy serving of description. But the action can never be terribly far behind. It has to come up. And you'll see with these writers, they're always very direct. Frederick Faust, as Max Brand, was always very direct, and it was lean prose and it kept forward. Uh, what you see with a lot of these writers too is that they started their life as journalists, which I did as well. I spent 10 years working as an archaeologist in the Middle East and Europe, and then I switched to journalism. And journalism really taught me some important things. It taught me to write concisely and clearly. It taught me to write to deadline. Journalists, a journalist with so-called writer's block, which is a myth. I'll get to that in a little bit. But a journalist with a writer's block is a journalist who's going to be out of a job really soon. And for example, Barbara Cartland, who's the most successful romance writer, something like her current bibliography is 723 titles, but there's dispute about that. There might have some lost books that got published and nobody even remembers. She said that in her early days of a reporter really helped her with her books, and I'll just quote here: "The reason my books are good is they are really journalese. You see, there's no surplus words. You keep to the point. You start with a bang and end with a bang. That's being a good journalist. And that's being a good writer too." This sort of discursive literary style is to the taste of some people, and I'm not going to knock it, but it's not to the taste of the majority. And while these writers were in the pulp era, many of them a couple of generations ago, we're in a new pulp era. Dean Wesley Smith, who's a fairly prominent voice in this new world of publishing, says that we're in the new pulp era. That where the writing is rewarded by producing a lot and being prolific and being over several different genres. And I think he's half right, because the pulp era tended to be short stories. I think a better metaphor is that we are in the new paperback era, the paperback boom of the 60s and 70s, when all of a sudden there were a lot of hardworking writers working under a dozen pen names, writing as Mac Boland or Louis L'Amour, or the Gunslinger, whatever it happened to be. They would work over half a dozen different genres under a dozen different pen names, and they made a very good living for themselves. And that's what we're in now, where you can have several different pen names, you can be over several different genres. I also am a professional ghostwriter, and I've written for production companies that have house names, and that's a house name is a name for a series of books. An author name, the author doesn't exist, and there's actually several different authors writing for that name. Uh, Famously, Louis L'Amour became a house name after he died, and I think I'd have to actually look this up, but I've heard it said that he wrote more books after he died than when he was alive. So we are really in a golden age of paperback writing and ebook writing, of course, where having a high production level is really rewarding. Now I can almost hear the doubts on the other side of the internet here as people are listening in, because it's like, oh, well, what about this global plague? Well, yeah, that's going to change everything, and we don't know how it's going to change everything yet. But the best way out of adversity is to work harder. The writers that have more out there in a bigger variety and coming out with quality work at a quicker rate are going to survive this catastrophe better than those who don't.
Well said. Now, I'm gonna talk for a second about what I can't do quickly, which is I find I have one series that I can write very, very quickly because the characters are pretty dispassionate, the action is forward, and there's not a lot of deep emotion in the books. Uh, like everyone's going to be okay at the end, even if there's bad stuff that happens. The characters aren't dealing with a whole lot of angst in their world. But I recently wrote a couple of books about grief and loss and very, very dark topics, like very dark topics. And
Mm.
um, I wrote two in a row, and I literally burnt in the same style that I've been writing all of these previous books, which was like very quickly and one on top of the other. And I wrote two, and I burnt out for 5 months. Like I could not write anything because these books took so much emotionally out of me. They drained every bit of just of my soul out, and I had just laid it all on the page. And so uh when I write those kind of books, if I feel like you can't write those kind of books fast. You need space between them. There's the pulpy style for me is not just the genre, but it's also this kind of larger than life swashbuckly character, or two people who do a meet cute, or there's a specific kind of book that you can write quickly, which is I think why thrillers and romance are number one and two always, because those ones have a very heavy structure, and you always know the bad guy's going to lose in the end. And there's stakes, there's high stakes, but there's never too high emotional stakes throughout the writing course of that book. Um, what would you say to someone who said that, as I just did?
Well, if it's a book that you're investing a lot of yourself and a lot of your emotions into, I would agree that you can't write it quickly, nor should you, because that is more than writing. That is searching within yourself to try to figure some stuff out. And that takes time. And that's fine. Now, one thing you might want to try is dividing your day between doing one of those and then giving yourself an emotional break with a pulpy type book, write two simultaneously, or work on some nonfiction. I, coming from a journalism background, I do a lot of history and archaeology and travel writing as well, and so that sort of lightens things up. And but I agree that definitely those sort of emotionally invested books you should take at a slower pace, because you're not doing just writing, you're doing self therapy there, and that's totally cool. Now, the way I tend to approach that is there's a little bit of me in every one of my books, and that includes the ghostwriting books. I always have a little bit of my feelings, or there's characters based on people who are important to me, either good or bad, or things I feel are important, or that sort of thing. And I keep fairly, still try to keep it reasonably light, but there's some serious elements in the books, and it it gets a bit harder with some of them. Even sometimes with the pulpy books, like I do a series called Trench Raiders, and I'm about to work on the fourth book, and it's one or two titles per year of the First World War. And these guys are in the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, which was a real regiment that was in the very first battle the British were in World War I, and they fought all the way to the end. And so I have these core of characters and some minor characters come and go, but I realize that I'm going to have to kill some of these guys off. It's not going to be realistic for all of my core characters to make it through the series. So that's kind of tough, because I've gotten to like them, and they've gotten, got this nice system of interaction. They work well as a team, but it's just not realistic for me to keep them all there. So yeah, you have to be you you tend to be a slightly lighter when you're doing these pulpy type books, but that doesn't. And when I say pulpy, I don't mean that they're necessarily featherweight. You can say some real stuff in this, and there's a lot of sort of wish fulfillment on part of the reader and the writer. I would say that Georges Simenon, who wrote the Jules Marguerite and a lot of other detective novels, he was a very incisive writer of character, and he would take a man and a woman in a certain situation, and he would think, well, what can I make them go over their limit? How can I get one of them to kill? And then he'd write about that. And his books are very much character studies, and they talk a lot about the human condition. And they're almost only secondarily mysteries. The mystery is almost an excuse to look at these people's lives. So you can get some good insight from so-called pulp as well.
Oh, yes. I'm not saying you can't get a lot from pulp, but there is certainly an emotional component that if you're going to write your memoir or a very dark literary fictiony kind of book, that this probably is not what you can't be churning out 20 of those a year, because there's
No,
just emotional depth that you have to plumb. Even though, like, I write a lot of pulpy books, and like there's tons of emotion there. In fact, I
sure.
have a great I have two series. One is the Obsidian Spindle Saga that I'm writing right now, and one is my Godsverse Chronicles, which is like super pulp, like super pulpy. And I've been
Mm.
writing this like the Obsidian Spindle Saga is a bit more complex, and there's multiple points of views that all overlap, and like geopolitical stuff. And I've been writing it for about a year, and I've noticed that I my word count was only about 800 words an hour. When I was writing the God's Verse books, it was about 1,000 to 2,000 words an hour. And I had thought that maybe I just, I had burnt out, or I was like just not as impassioned about writing anymore, or like something. But then I recently went back and wrote another God's Verse book. And my word count just like almost tripled. Like literally one day I was finishing one book, and the next day I started the God's Verse book. And the amount of words that I would get out in a day for these like super pulpy books was like literally double or triple, with just the style of how the characters interact with the world. It made it so much easier to deal with these like sort of more hard boiled characters who weren't like plumbing the depths of their humanity, and that wasn't super complex. That was a lot of, not that there wasn't complexity, and like the story still had a whole bunch of beats in it, but uh it wasn't the I didn't have to stop and think about the like each moment after I had finished it. So it just made the writing of it so much quicker. And I feel like I could probably churn out one year I churned out 18 novels. And I was like, how do I do that? And then when I went back to do these God's Verse books, I was like, oh, well, yeah, like I can, this totally makes sense, because if I write in this very specific style, then I can write double or triple what I was writing just like literally a week before.
Yeah, and a lot of it is also sort of self-imposed limitations on the part of the author. I had an interesting insight a few weeks ago. One of my ghostwriting clients pays me considerably more than all the others, and I was working on one of the things for this client, and I was like, "Oh, this is terrible. I'm really phoning this in. What's the matter with me? This is so fake, blah blah blah." But my client loves my work. It gets good reviews. It's the best sell. I'm the best selling titles of that house name. So obviously I'm doing it right. I'm like, why do I think that everything I write for this guy is terrible? And then I realized, oh, it's because he pays me more. So I get into this worry that I'm not worth it. And I realized, you're fine, Sean. You're doing it right. You know, he's happy. The readers are happy. You should be happy. Just calm down and write it. Another thing is that there are times when you don't feel like writing. You don't want to write, other because it's either too emotionally draining, or you just, some days you wake up and you just don't feel like it. And there's a great quote that I love, and I feel like taping this on my wall. And it's by Zane Grey. He was one of the early greats in Western writing. He wrote Riders of the Purple Sage and a bunch of other titles. And he didn't make it too much into the book because he only wrote a couple of hundred books. He wasn't all that prolific, but he had something he put in his diary, which is, quote, "This morning I had no desire to write, no call, no inspiration, no confidence, no joy. I had to force myself. But when I mastered the vacillation and dread and had done a day's work, what a change of feelings. I had a rush of sweet sensations." Now, we're all feeling that. It's really easy to get up in the morning, turn on the TV, or get onto the news online and just fall into a well of misery. And trust me, I've done it myself. But get to your computer and write. It's one of the best ways for you to get through this professionally and psychologically. Get into those worlds and produce some stuff. You can't let this sort of thing stop you. It If you really make all this extra time that we're having in lockdown work for you, and by you I mean not just Russell, but anybody listening, if you make that time work for you, whether it's writing or painting, dancing, whatever you do, actually, no, a dance instructor who's been really practicing a lot in her apartment, but what you just really work on upping your game, you'll feel so much better. It will really help, and it will turn a huge negative into at least partially a minor positive.
I love that. Um, Next question is about shorter versus longer books, and you have a great
Mm.
chart, which I also have in a. I have a similar chart in my "How to Become a Successful Author" book. But I'd love for you to talk about. You actually have a graph, not a graph, but like a formula where you show like that shorter books are more profitable than longer books, and I would love you
Oh
to
yeah,
talk about that.
sure. One thing I noticed with a lot of these authors is that they tended to write shorter books. They would often be in genres that appreciated that. Barbara Cartland, Corinne Tallado were both romance writers, and so romance tends to be shorter. I have a few Western writers in this book. Westerns tend to be shorter. And Enid Mary Blyton and Ursula Bloom both wrote a lot of children's work, so those tend to be short as well. And that way you can get out more titles. And there's some interesting things with this. Now, and this definitely applies to indie publishing. Let's take an example here. Say in the time that say you want to write a 120,000 word epic novel about whatever. Okay, you can do that, and it can sell. But in that same time, you can write three 40,000 word novels. Now, if you go traditional, the advance for those three novels is going to be considerably more than the one big novel. And it also offers you three times the number of opportunities for translation rights, film rights, audio rights, all that other stuff. It also is sort of a three chance the chance of becoming a bestseller, which I always like to say, sending a book out in the world is like buying a lottery ticket, but I have a lot of tickets. So you want to get as much out there as possible. But think of it this way. Okay, say you have that example. You have the one author has 120,000 word book, and an author has three 40,000 word books. They both go on Amazon. Now now Amazon, of course, is 70% royalties. Excuse me. And so say you can't price too high on ebooks because then you're pricing yourself out. So say you price the 120,000 word novel at $5.99. You get $4.20 per copy. Now, if you publish all those three 40,000 word novels at $2.99 each, you get $2.10 per copy. So that's exactly half of what you get for the longer novel. But the three novels together will almost certainly outsell the single novel. So now let's assume that each of those four novels I talked about sells 1,000 copies in their first year. So the big novel nets $4,200. The three short novels net a total of $6,300. So that's a little more than 50% more than the big novel. So that is, first off, more money, which is always good, but there's also more opportunity. You have more visibility, which is essential in this world. If there's series, you get more follow through sales. You can also get crossover sales. Um, and you can bundle them, or you can put one on sale and to try to get uh, crossover sales to the other two. You can do all sorts of different things with them. You can indie publish two of them and send one off to a traditional publisher. And the more you get out, the more crossover you get. Now, there's a big debate among indie publishers whether you should have a pen name for each genre that you write, or if you should just put everything under one name. And I'm not sure which is correct. I've never seen any hard data that proves one over the other. I personally have all of my personal stuff under my one name. And I noticed something weird. Uh, when I started publishing my Masked Man of Cairo series, so that features a great war veteran solving crimes in Cairo in 1919. When I started that series, that's been doing fairly well, and sales of my Trench Raider series went up. Now that's kind of weird because Masked Man of Cairo is sort of lighthearted Indiana Jones type thing. There's a lot of comic relief, and there's some fights and all that, but it's a light mystery. Trench Raiders is this gritty, violent sort of men's adventure fiction. And the only thing that's in common, those books have in common, is that they have something to do with World War One, and yet the sales support one another. So having more shorter books helps. Although that said, the average Masked Man of Cairo is about 95,000 words long, so I'm breaking my own rule there.
Well, I think the most important thing to pull out of that is you specified genre. For instance, I write in fantasy, and urban fantasy YA supports 60,000 words, but like adult fantasy is not the kind of genre you want to write a 40,000 word book in. And I know because that's what I was doing when I first started. It's just picking the genre and the word count is really important because in most of my friends who are romance writers, they are writing 40 to 50,000 word books or even 20,000 word books. If they're writing erotica, they may be writing 7 or 8,000 word books. And and that is what's supported by that market. But if you go into a different market, especially something like historical fiction, they're going to expect longer books, but you can also price the books more expensive. A lot of my friends who write historical fiction are writing 150, 200,000 word books, but they're charging $9.99 for those books. And they're only coming out with a book once a year because it is very heavily researched. So I do think that picking the genre and knowing what the uh, parameters of the genre are most are really really important. I would definitely not tell you to write a sci-fi fantasy book that is 40,000 words unless you are maybe writing for children or in specific, very specific genres. For
Of
me, I
course, I
always
totally agree.
yeah.
Yeah, but one thing that helps with the word count and getting even longer books done quickly is write what you know. Everyone always says this, and it is really true. With my North African series, I tend to write the books. I start the books in the actual country where I am. When I started working on the case of the Karnak killer, it was my latest trip to Cairo, and the book starts in Cairo, and I started the opening chapters when I got to Cairo, and then I went up to Karnak, up in southern Egypt, near getting close to the Sudanese border, and so wandering through the temples, and it's really easy to describe great ancient Egyptian temples if you've just walked through them. So those longer books get done quicker than they would otherwise. And those are business trips. That's tax deductible. So that's a plus. And a lot of the authors in this book really stuck with the write what you know. For example, Indeed Mary Blyton's stories all take place in the British countryside where most of them anyway, where she walked every day. There was a lot of the Western writers would had spent time in the West. There was this one named Lauren Bosworth Payne who was a real cowboy back in the late 20s, in the sort of last glimmerings of the old West, and he started reading the old Western pulp magazines, and he was like, "Oh, those city slickers can't tell lasso from barbed wire." And he said, "I can do better than this," and he did because he knew what he was talking about.
Absolutely. Well,
And
not only that, but they also seem to like be very know the tropes of their genre. So not only did they know what they know from like writing where they're from or what you were talking about, but they also understood the genre that they were doing forwards and backwards. I remember one person, I forgot which person in the book was talking about the 11 things you have to write in a mystery novel. And if you get 9 of them right, you'll have a hit. If you get 11 of them right, you can't fail. And another person was talking about the genres in Western. And they all seem to be very tightly, very much know not just writing the places that they knew, but also in very deep knowledge of the genre that they wrote in.
Mm. Yeah, of course you have to do your homework. You have to read. You read in your genre, but you also have to read history books in your that are pertain to your genre. Because I come from an archaeology background, I'm always reading Egyptological books or obscure history books anyway. So I might as well make them work for me. And I mean, I was doing that long before I was a writer. I was reading that stuff. So just continuing with that, I focused it a bit more. And it's also practice. The more you write, the better you get at it. It's the same with anything else. I mean, you probably know musicians, and how much studio time do they do? How much time do they practice in their garage before they get on stage? And then they do a gig, and then they do another gig, and another gig, and next week it's another gig, and they get better. And you've seen this, I'm sure, and I've certainly seen this with musicians working their way up, and their 30th gig was better than their second, and their 200th gig was certainly better than their 30th. You just got to keep at it and keep practicing. And be self-critical as well.
Absolutely. So we're nearing the end of our hour, and I want to talk about you and your other work. But I think probably we've been talking about, we've been talking about this for about an hour. And the one thing that I think really resonated with me that we haven't talked about yet was you have a section about stopping the purple prose and
Mm.
making the prose much simpler and easier to write faster. And I believe you have 7 or 8 steps of 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 writing the purple, how to stop writing the purple prose. And I'd love for you to sort of run through that if you can remember it, or I wrote it down if you do not.
Well, okay. I mean, prolific writers they tend to go simple and straightforward. That's the journalistic background that I was talking about before. And you just as I said before, with the thick descriptions and the sedate plots, that sort of thing, it tends to slow down the reader. But uh, you you want to keep things flowing because it keeps you flowing and keeps the reader flowing. Now, I wasn't quite sure. Oh, yes, I know what you were talking about. You were talking about William Wallace Cook in The Fiction Factory. He actually, Fiction Factory is a great book on the early dime novel days. You can find it on Gutenberg for free. William Wallace Cook, The Fiction Factory. Read that book. It's a great book on work ethic. But he quotes another writer, Dr. Everett Hale, Edward Everett Hale, and he had a step-by-step thing. He said, know what you want to say it, use your own language, leave out all the fine phrases. A short word is better than a long one. The fewer words, other things being equal, the better. And number 7, cut it to pieces, which means revise, revise, revise. Now, I would say I would modify this a little bit. Now, know what you want to say. Yes, that doesn't mean that you have to plot an outline. I'm what they call a pantser. I never really liked that expression. It kind of sounds weird, but that's what I am. Most of my books, I tend not to know where I'm going, or I know the ending and I write to that. Especially with the series, because my series, it's not just about the mysteries or the battles or whatever it is. It's about the positioning of the main characters and how they end up at the end of the novel from where they started. So I know where Sir Augustus and Mustafa and Faisal were at the end of this book 3, and I want them at this certain place in their relationship together by the end of book 4. So how do I get there with a mystery and some travel up the Nile in between? So that's what I do. Um, then say it. You just have to be direct. You have to know what you want to say about how this fight scene works, or how they get on into the temple at night, that sort of thing. You figure out, and you just say it. You go direct, and don't try to imitate other people. That's a beginner's game. We've all done the Lovecraft pastiches when we were younger, and they were all embarrassing, and we've never published them. At least I haven't. Um, and when it comes to fine phrases and short words being better than a long one, that tends to be true. But if you have a bit of a flight of fancy that works, then whatever works for the story. The fewer words, other things being equal, the better. I would tend to agree, but the other things being equal is a key phrase. As I said, with my historical fiction and anything set in an exotic locale, the reader wants that stuff. They want you to spend a little time with the smell of the spices in the market, or the muezzin's call over the hills. They want that, or they want the sights and sounds of the trench and the front line during an artillery barrage. So all things being equal, you could add more words for something like that, and you do have to revise. One thing that I have noticed, and this is very controversial, is that most of these writers wrote only one draft. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't go back and make some minor corrections, but I've seen some of the manuscripts from these writers, the original manuscripts. And other than a few corrected typos and maybe adding a sentence here and there in the margins, what they wrote when they sat down was what ended up getting sent to the publisher and accepted, and after slight modifications, published. You look at the original first draft manuscript and the published book, and they're virtually identical. And that takes practice. You can't get there on your first 10 or 20 books, but you can get there.
Yeah, that's what I just took a master class with R.L. Stein, and that's what he said he does also. So let's move to talking about you and your work. And we can talk. We've just spent an hour talking about writing secrets of the world's most prolific authors, but we can certainly keep talking about that if you would like, or we can talk about some of your other work. And it's really what you want to get people to go out and check out after we finished talking about this book. I definitely think writing secrets of the world's most prolific authors. Look, I've said this before. Like, I don't promote many books on this podcast because, but I very much enjoyed this book, but mostly because it's probably just near and dear to my heart as someone who is quite prolific and hates when people talk about that you can't have prolific and good books. So like it hit that or resonance with me. But yeah, let's talk about what you want to promote besides this book, or why, if you want to promote this book, why people should go out and check it out right now.
Well, it's for writing secrets of the world's most prolific authors. It's for fans of pulp fiction. It would be interesting for the bios, but it's mainly, of course, directed towards writers in any stage of their writing. And I've used it a lot as lecture material for the writing group I run here in Madrid. And I think some people have gotten some things out of it, and that's good. Um, and like any how to write book, you take what you can from it, and it's got a bunch of different advice in there, and take what you find resonates with you most, and what you can adopt more easily into your writing life at this point. Um,
What I
and
really
I,
liked about it that we didn't touch on was you go through in a lot of detail the daily writing habits and the specifics of about a dozen or so prolific authors, what they wrote, why they wrote it, what their process was each day. And it really, as someone who just likes to like study the world's best in fields, it was very nice to just for the first part to just get like what this person did and how they were able to be prolific, because it is going to change, but then you can see sort of the parallels for all of the authors.
yeah, there was a lot of things that they had in common, and I go into that and sort of summarize at the end. And there were various people I could have put in, like Andre Norton or Kathleen Lindsay, but I found that I had already said everything that they also said, so I didn't want to get too repetitive. Shorter is better, and because I didn't want to lose the point. So yeah, there was a lot of commonality in that, and I specifically wrote this book as a tool for myself. It was research getting turned into a product, of course. It helped me up my word count. Many of these writers were writers I had read and loved for a long time, but I had never read their method. I hadn't read any of their autobiographies, and some of them were new to me. I mean, I had never dipped into Barbara Cartland before I researched this book. This elaborate, the mother-in-law, grandmother-in-law of Lady Diana, and she was always going out to banquets with barons, and she lived in a palace and all this crazy stuff. And of course, she wrote romance. Of course, my life never intersected with hers, but she has a lot to teach me. Her method for writing these historical romances is just as good when you apply it to science fiction or thrillers or whatever. And I find that it works universally over everything I write. And as I said, I write a lot of different genres. I have a series called Toxic World, which is a post-apocalyptic series, and that's gotten some good traction. Post-apocalyptic writing is taking a bit of a beating at the moment. I kind of understand if people don't want to read Toxic World right now, but and that was my first real breakthrough actually for writing quickly. Um, I was working for Gatling.com, which was a big travel blog. And you remember a few years ago, the bottom sort of fell out of the blogging industry because advertisers got panicky, thought they weren't getting good money for value, and pulled out. And advertising rates crashed, and a lot of places went under. This was a travel blog that had sent me all over the world. They paid for me to go travel. It was wonderful. I lost that job, and I was suddenly out of work. It was my full-time job, and I had this idea. I was living in a place I didn't like that was very polluted, and so I turned it into Toxic Bay, and I wrote. I lost my job just as NaNoWriMo was starting, and I'd never done NaNoWriMo. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have any work. I'm going to work on NaNoWriMo. And the first day, I wrote 8,500 words. I was like, oh wow, I can do that, and they were good words. And I just kept going. So that was a real learning experience for me that I sort of broke through that way. And it was sort of out of desperation because I'd literally lost my job the day before. And uh, for example, then I have other series like I talked about, um, like the Tangier Bank Heist is the first of my Morocco series, and that's fun because Tangier was this wild west of Morocco back in the 40s and 50s, and it's a case about somebody stealing a bank, and no, they didn't rob the bank, they stole the bank. And this is an actual case that I culled from the old newspapers down at the American legation there, and so that was fun. And then the Mass Man of Cairo series actually got a big boost because just last week one of my writing clients got panicky because of the coronavirus and pulled out. And so I lost $14,000 in the space of a single email. So the first thing I did after saying various unrepeatable things that I won't relay to you, and pacing around and grumbling in my apartment, is I sat down and wrote 2,000 words in my latest Cairo mystery novel. And I felt better. I didn't feel good. It was still a minor tragedy in the middle of this major tragedy, but I felt better. And that's the key. Write what makes you feel good or what helps you through whatever you need to get through, like some of your more emotional novels. Excuse me. I have a bit of a congestion, which is not coronavirus, but I being stuck in close quarters with two other people. These things happen. So yeah, these books, they're variety, and I've done some standalones. Most books of mine tend to be series, though. I did a western, which didn't get very far. Warpath into Sonora. It was a western from the Apache point of view. But what I've learned is if you want to go for westerns in this new world of publishing, and you want to be successful, you got to write a lot of westerns. One's just not going to cut it.
Right, right. Well, let's do this. So we're almost out of time, but
Okay.
besides writing secrets of the world's most prolific authors, if somebody wanted to get a sense of like the most Sean book out there, where do you recommend that they start?
I would definitely say the Masked Man of Cairo would be the best. And the first book in that is The Case of the Purloined Pyramid. Um, and that there's a lot of me in that book. There's a lot of me in all three major characters in that book, unusually. And the the sites of old Cairo, the old medieval buildings and the old madrasas and mosques and the trip to Giza and all of that, that's all things I'd done. A lot of that thick description that you're reading in that book is from the eyes of the author. Things I saw where I had to cast it back in time a bit, but street vendors, people I met at cafes, all of that got put into that book. So you are, in a sense, sharing one of my trips to Egypt with that. So, and
Awesome.
if you want to get in touch, the best way is my handle is writer Sean, writer Sean Sean, one word, and you'll find that on my public Facebook. So facebook.com/writer Sean, Instagram.com/writer Sean if you want to see some of my travel photos. I should actually put up some more because I haven't been anywhere in a few weeks. But those are the two main points of contact. You can also get me on my blog, which is midlistwriter at .blogspot.com. So midlist writer as one word, and I take midlist writer as a badge of honor. I'm a midlister, and I am proud of it.
That's wonderful. It made me smile to hear Midlist Writer. So, okay, last thing. You have one piece of advice to give to somebody either starting their career, sustaining their career, could be what you would tell yourself, but it is the thing that you want people to hear, to remember when they leave this podcast. What would you tell them?
Okay, well, I'm going to relay a, the best bit of writing advice I ever got. It was right at the beginning. I was working as an archaeologist, but I was thinking to transition into writing because I wasn't very happy with it. I had a master's and I was working on various digs, and to step up in my career, I'd have to get a PhD and go into academia, and the academic world just didn't really appeal to me for various reasons. And so I went to a writers conference, and there was a female mystery writer there who had written a couple of dozen mysteries under her own name and then a ton under various house names and pen names. And I wish I could remember her name. This is 20 years ago, but I can't because I would really like to thank this woman. What she said to the workshop that we were doing is, if you can write a page a day, and every one of you can, by the end of the year, you'll have a book. Now, my first reaction when she said that was, oh, what if I write 2 pages a day? And that's all there is to it. Work. You got more time than you probably ever will in your life. Fill it with something. Work, work, work. Write. Dedicate yourself to it. So we're all going to get out of this. I mean, well, most of us are going to get out of this. Chances are, whoever you are who's listening to me, you're going to make this through this. You're going to take some financial hits. You're going to take some emotional hits. I've already had both, but you're going to step out of your apartment, blinking in the sunlight, desperately needing a haircut, probably a couple of pounds heavier. I definitely will be. And you're going to look back at this experience and you can say one of two things. You can say, well, I ate a lot of nachos and watched Netflix, or I really pushed it. I think I mentioned this earlier. In the podcast that you really pushed it. And you can look back at it and be proud that I took a step forward in this career under the face of adversity. And if you can do that now, you can do that through anything.
Sean, thank you so much for stopping by and talking with us. So that was Sean Maclaughlan, and I hope you enjoyed that one. I learned so much. Some things that just strengthened what I thought before, and some completely new things. If you enjoyed this one, go pick up Writing Secrets of the World's Most Prolific Authors. I don't recommend a lot of books on this show, but I do recommend that one. It was a great read. You'll learn a lot about each author's process, but also the tips, tricks, and hacks you can use to become a more prolific writer yourself. And if you want to write a better novel, you could take my free novel writing course over at thecompletecreative.com/novel today. All right, that's it for me. If you've enjoyed this show, like, subscribe, and review. Otherwise, I will see you next time.